Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
So when I get sick and it's kind of hard to practice, I a lot of times think about what's it going to be like when I'm dying, and I don't know what kind of condition I'm going to be in, and what are the chances of really actually thinking of Ma or being in your practice?
Well, if you're hit by a truck, virtually none. One of the reasons we're practicing is so that we can, people say die well. I would just say die interestingly. We're now in the bardo of life, or the sandhi of life, the time in between having been born and dying again. And most of us are interested in stuff happening here. And then we have the bardo of dying. And that's really interesting too. I mean, I think it's kind of a hallmark of this kind of tradition that the bardo of dying is just as interesting as the bardo of life. The problem is, though, that when we're dying, we're often in pain, or we've just lost some sort of mental capacity, or we're doped up, or, whatever. It's hard to be alert enough when you're dying to remember to do a mantra, or think of your teacher, or be in the state of your practice. So, in order to have the proverbial snowflake's chance in hell of doing that, we have to practice now while we are alert, as we think we are, as alert as we are anyway, as awake as we might be. We have to practice now so that when we're in the bardo of dying, that there's a chance that we might even automatically remember our practice, that mantra could come to us even if we are in some less than ideal condition. Or that when our community is standing around our bedside chanting our mantra, or the teacher's whispering the teachings in our ear as we're dying, we'll recognize them. That I have seen happen even when someone is almost unconscious. So I wrote about this person we were in the same mandala, same kula together, and then she became a student, and she had breast cancer, and she was dying, and she was in the very, very last stages of dying. I don't know how much you guys know about the mechanics of death, but at the very end, the calcium starts to release from your bones as earth element is dissolving, and calcium is a sedative. So you go into this sort of death coma, and that's as she had stopped eating, she had stopped responding to anybody, she was in this sort of semi-conscious state, and her mom put her cell phone up to her ear while I was on the phone, and I whispered her mantra into her ear, and she said, I remember, I remember. And there was joy in her voice. So even in that condition, if you have practiced enough, and this was someone who practiced a lot for decades. So even though maybe she wouldn't have remembered it on her own, when I said it into her ear, she remembered it. And this has actually happened a few times to me. So I know that that isn't really that uncommon, that could happen. So the idea is that we do as much practice as we can now, and then specific practices for preparing to die, like dream yoga is a specific practice of preparing to die. And also just doing mantra. Mantra is usually the easiest thing to get in your system deeply enough that it will come to you spontaneously as you're dying. It's very tangible. So if you did a mantra for your whole life, there's much more chance that it will come to you. Whether or not you're going to have a conscious death, in other words, you are actually in the bardos of death. You've died clinically according to Western and Tibetan medicine, let's say, or Chinese medicine, or Ayurveda. But you're still aware in that next bardo of the transiting to wherever, That is much harder to maintain consciousness there, I think. But it isn't as hard to be aware of your practice, but right before you've died, as you're just entering into those bardos.
So when I get something like headache and nausea, I oftentimes just delay my practice because it feels pretty miserable to do it. But now I guess I'm wondering if I should like really.
If you're interested in having an interesting death, yeah. Yeah. The idea is that if we can, for instance, do practice in our dreams, in this kind of tradition, especially in Dzogchen, lucid dreaming isn't really that important. Lucid dreaming is considered to be like a very kind of basic dream practice. It's much more important that we do certain things in dreams, whether we're lucid or not, and have certain kinds of experiences in dreams. So if you can sort of wake up or be more awake in a dream, or you can practice when you're sick, or your practice comes to you spontaneously in dreams, those are all considered to be great times to prepare for dying. Or when you're very afraid. When you're very afraid, it's also a good time. Our problem in this culture is many people are rarely that afraid. I mean, anxiety is different. A lot of people have constant anxiety, but not really that live wire of really being afraid. But if you ever have the boon of having that experience, try to do mantra or meditation when you're in that condition. Because there are scary things while we're dying too.
When you were talking about how it's good to practice when you're sick to prepare for practicing when you're dying, but practicing when you're sick sucks. Like,
it does.
It's awful.
So there's a lot of what are called pointing out instructions in this kind of tradition. They're like instructions for things that you can't really be told how to do them. And one of them is like goes something like this: attention is without focusing, or awareness is without focusing, or without focus. The idea is that we're trying to be more like the entire alive aware reality, and the entire alive aware reality is focused on everything all at once. If you're doing a practice where you're being aware of your breath, which is a kind of practice we never do, the idea would be that we would be aware of being a person in a room, that we would be aware of the sounds and the feeling in the room, that we would be aware of the building that we're in and the city that we're in, that our awareness would be really, really big, even as we are also paying attention to our breath. When you get bigger instead of smaller, like I'm going to get immersed in that breath, God damn it, you know. When you get bigger instead of smaller, the pain becomes something in the landscape of that vastness.
I have a question kind of related to that about the difference or similarities between hosting and digesting.
They're basically the same. Because if you're really hosting, that means that you're being all for the other. And nothing that's happening is causing you to divert your energy and attention into your reactivity. So not being reactive along the lines of your karmic tensions is what digesting means. It means that you're able to be with everything just as it is and not be wrapped up in your reactions to things. So you might be having reactions to things, but you're not involved with those reactions in a way that is sucking energy away from hosting. The same person that said intensity is density, Swami Rudranandra, he also talked about digestion. That was one of his main themes. And he had a lot of kriyas that he learned initially from the lineage of Swami Nityananda of Ganeshpuri. He reworked those kriyas so that they were way more complicated. They became like these Rube Goldberg inner plumbing exercises, kind of. Very, very complex. And he talked about everything that he did as work. That you have to do this tremendous work. He would say, talk like tremendous work in a Brooklyn accent, which I didn't do that. That sounded more like BDC or something. But anyway, to suck in energy and circulate it and digest everything that's happening. that will change things for you in your experience, but it isn't the ultimate form of digestion, that kind of work, or that kind of conception of digestion as work, as something that you need to do in this incredibly effortful way. The real digestion is when you relax so deeply that you become invisible. Invisible in the sense that there's no way that you're perverting the energy of a situation because you have a need to pay attention to yourself because you're anxious or you're angry or you're whatever. You're feeling these things. So our practice is really much more about relaxation than about work. And we do work along the way. We do put in effort, but as Ma said, effort leads to effortless being. So eventually we're trying to be in a state of no effort. This is what the meaning of ashrama, no effort, the place of no effort. And Ma said, there's no need to build ashrams because the whole of reality is an ashram, a place of no effort. So we're basically in recovery from all this effort. We're recovering from that. Of course, the Kundalini tradition is different from Trika. Grew up in the same milieu, but it's not the same tradition. It's a lot in common. And Trika and all of the traditions streams that went into Trika, there are aspects of it which are about the control of energy, much more similar to Kundalini. But that's not the only part of the tradition. There's a whole other more contemplative aspect to the tradition, and that's what I'm focused on. Ma said that we can burn our karmas through effort or we can melt them through devotion. If people need to do a lot of hard effort, which I did when I was younger, I was tremendously over-effortful in my approach to sadhana. But if we can go straight to melting by devotion, that's good too.
I have a question about something you posted a few weeks ago, and it was talking about how we enter into practice or onto the path through the door of our karmas, and as those mature in the heart, there's a way in which the heart is not moved. And I'm really curious to hear you talk about that not being moved in the heart space.
Yeah, that's a really standard kind of teaching. Not always put exactly that way, but that's a pretty standard teaching throughout Hinduism and Trika and Dzogchen, that there's something which remains unaffected by all the things we think are so serious. So we have all of our karmas, which is an aspect of impermanence. All of our karmas are the art or the expression that are aspects of impermanence. They come and they go. And we think that, for instance, we think we can be damaged. We think we can be traumatized in a way that really damages us in some essential way. We think that things leave permanent marks on us. We have that view in this culture. But in the view of these traditions, there's stuff that feels like that, but underneath that, there's something else, which is wisdom, which is what is giving rise to all of those patterns, all of those karmas. And that thing that is giving rise to all of those karmas, even the concept of trauma and karma itself, which the real teaching in this tradition is there is no karma. Karma is just an aspect of the display. It's just part of the display, of the creative display. In any case, underneath that is the absolute. And the absolute, as the artist or the magician, is not affected by, it's not changed by, it's not hurt by or pleased by, or it doesn't care how many likes it gets on Facebook. It is just itself all the time, having the experience of joyful creation. It's not affected by anything that happens. Another image we could think of, there's many, many famous images in both Indian traditions and the Tibetan traditions, and I presume in the traditions from China too, although I'm not as familiar. But there are many, many images for this. For instance, the image of the mirror is a very, very famous transmission image where the mirror remains mirror no matter what's reflected in it. So it doesn't matter whether a vase of flowers or a pile of dog poop is reflected in the mirror. The mirror remains unaffected by what is reflected in it. And in this case, the analogy is with the mirror of consciousness. Another image is from non-conceptual meditation of the mountain. All kinds of things could be crawling all over the mountain, and the mountain's just being mountain. So this is part of the idea. Now, when we go into the heart space, that's where one of the ways that we can encounter that absolute, that we can encounter the eternal, that we can encounter wisdom, unadulterated wisdom that's giving rise to all of this. And there's many, many, many opportunities in life to encounter this. We have many opportunities. We call them santi, gaps between everything. And certainly the heart space is a santi, it's a gap where we can experience this unadulterated livingness. It's not static. Sometimes people think it's like unchanging, some sort of static whatever. It's not like that at all. It's like blazingly alive. But it is unaffected. It's unconditioned. So Veronica was asking about spontaneity, whether it's random or whether it's planned, or has a plan, has a goal of some sort. So think of improvisation, like improvisational dance or improvisational poetry or something like that. It's informed by intelligence and creativity and skill. Someone who's a really good improviser has a lot of skill. They're not just like, oh, let me just try this out for the first time. Cool. Right? That's like improvisation that's not maybe as enjoyable. But when someone has consummate skill and they improvise, it's breathtaking. It's not planned and it's not random because someone's bringing all their intelligence and creativity and training to it. Someone in our community is a dancer. She's a Kathak dancer. And in that tradition from India, to be able to improvise is considered the highest form of the art of that dance. So everybody who's not reached that stage yet has to do things in a certain form. But once you have gotten to a certain place, then you can improvise with the form. So improvisation, it doesn't have a goal about where it's going, but it's an expression of intelligence and creativity and skill. So spontaneity in the sense that everything that's happening here is happening through the spontaneous play of this alive, aware reality. But it's made of incredible wisdom and skill and creativity. So the point isn't whether we're going somewhere or it's random. The point is that it's expressive. It's a self-expression of this reality, everything that's happening. It's sort of out of that horizontal line between random and planned or random and goal-oriented. It's not really on that trajectory. It's expression, self-expression. Like art. We don't look at a painting and go, well, I really want to know where this is going. Is there any point to this? We just enjoy it as an expression. There's always an argument in academia about funding the humanities, funding things that aren't goal-oriented necessarily, funding things that are more related to literature and art and things like that. Because in our culture, everything's supposed to be productive. But this tradition doesn't really care about that. The maniacal attachment to productivity is just one of the creative expressions. It's just kind of like, ha ha ha, look at these funny people doing this. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, Please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.